Hi everyone, this is African Tales by Gozie. Hope this story meets you well wherever you are. Please sit tight as we explore together the journey of Mamada. Come on, let's go. In a bustling market, Mamada sat in her shop surrounded by piles of expensive and beautiful fabrics and shining jewelries. The sun shone brightly overhead, casting a hot glow over the market. Coupled with the air filled with the sounds of vendors calling out to customers and haggling price with them, and the chatter of people passing by, making the place somewhat too hot for comfort. Beautiful lady, come and see my beautiful fabrics, the finest in the whole market, Mamada called out to the passers-by, her voice vibrant and filled with warmth. She displayed her wares proudly, arranging the fabrics neatly on her shelves in a way that best portrays the intricate patterns and bright colors to attract customers. One by one, people stopped by her store, admiring the beautiful fabrics and carefully selecting the ones they wanted to purchase. Mamada greeted each customer with a smile, offering them a good price and sharing stories about the origins of the fabrics and the talented artisans who created them. This singular art she learned long ago keeps the customers interested enough to convince them to make a purchase from her, so she always used it whenever an opportunity presents itself. As the morning turned into afternoon, the market became even busier, with more people coming to shop. Mamada continued to call out to customers, her voice growing hoarse from hours of talking and negotiating. After a while, she decided to take a break. She sat down on a small stool in her shop, resting her jaw in her hand as she began to think about her life. She looked around her shop, taking in the colorful fabrics and the busy market, and reflected on her journey to becoming a successful market vendor. Mamada had always been a hardworking and determined woman. As a young girl, she helped her mother with chores and later goes over to her grandmother's place to learn traditional crafts, developing a love for creating beautiful things with her hands, which is why she chose to sell handcrafted fabrics when she had the opportunity. It reminds her of the days she spent with Mama, as her grandmother was fondly called by everyone. When my mother was older, she moved to the city in search of better opportunities. She remembered how this business started with just a few fabrics and trinkets, working tirelessly to build her inventory and establish her reputation in the market. Over the years, she had faced untold challenges and setbacks, but giving up has never been an option, so she had forged on even when there was no more way. Sitting right there, my mother felt a sense of pride and gratitude for all that she had accomplished. She thought about her children then, and her heart immediately skipped in fear. But before the thought could process itself, she heard the voice of a girl approaching her store, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Auntie, please, these fabrics are so beautiful. Can you tell me more about them?" the girl asked, pointing to a particularly colorful fabrics displayed on a shelf. Smiling warmly at the young girl, my mother began to share her stories once again, just as she had done with countless customers before. She told the girl about the different types of fabrics and the meanings behind the patterns and the talented artisans who created them. As the afternoon wore on, my mother decided to leave her problems for a later time and chose to face her customers. "There will always be time for the troubles," she said. With this firm decision, her voice grew stronger with each tale she told. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and joy. But behind the cheerful smile my mother wore at her store in the bustling market, a heavy burden weighed on her heart. The vibrant colors of the fabrics and the dramas that usually play out at the market did little to lift her spirit as she struggled with the pain of being labeled a witch by her own children. She had always thought that she was a loving and devoted mother. She had sacrificed so much for her children, working tirelessly to provide for them and ensuring they had a good life. She had always been there for them, supporting them through their struggles and celebrating their successes. It was incomprehensible to her how her own children would suddenly turn against her and accuse her of being a witch. The rumors had started a few months back, spreading like wildfire through the village, and some acquaintances she knew in her area of residence had been saying some things she didn't understand at first, until news came from the village. Whispers and gossip everywhere. But she had gotten tired of picking calls from anyone who came from her husband's village, trying to explain that she doesn't know what was going on. My mother was heartbroken and confused when she heard this. She couldn't understand how her own children, whom she loved so dearly, could believe such hurtful accusations against her. She had always been open and honest with them, sharing stories about their family heritage and the traditions passed down through generations. She had taught them to be strong and independent, and she had always encouraged them to follow their dreams and pursue their passions. But despite her pain and confusion, my mother tried to reach out to her children in order to mend the fractured relationship. But each time she gives an invite to them to talk and share their feelings, hoping to understand what had led them to believe such hurtful things about her, her efforts were always met with silence and rejection, as her children continued to avoid her and maintain their belief in the accusations. As the days turned into weeks, my mother felt increasingly isolated and alone. The weight of the accusations and the rejection from her own children began to take a toll on her, affecting her mood and her interactions with others. She struggled to maintain her cheerful demeanor at the market, as the pain in her heart grew heavier with each passing day. One day, as my mother sat in her store, gloomy and lost in thought, struggling to hold back tears, an elderly woman approached her, Mama Jo, who had known my mother for many years, as she was the person who helped her to get a shop. She had sensed that something was wrong, and she had put it up for some weeks, praying and hoping that the problem would get sorted out. Or maybe the younger woman would find it necessary to come to her. But it has been too long, and she can't watch her struggle every day to put a smile on her face anymore. So she had come to find out what the matter could be this time. Mama Ada, you don't seem like yourself today. Is everything all right? Mama Jo asked, her voice filled with concern. Mama Ada smiled and tried to become lively again, telling the woman everything was fine, that she was just tired. The older woman looked at her like only an elder with much experience could and sighed. My daughter, she began, I represent your mother in this place. I know your story well, and I have watched you conquer, so don't try to be brave with me. Talk to me. A problem shared is half solved already. Tears welled up in Mamada's eyes, as the floodgate over her carefully managed emotions seemed to have broken open with that show of concern. The elderly woman quickly closed the burglary door of the shop, sensing that they needed all the privacy they could get in the open market. She sat down, using her back to provide as much shield as her small frame could manage, gently rubbing the back of the younger woman as she waited for the tears to subside. She doesn't know what could cause this much pain and anguish, because even when she first met her as a young widow, deprived of everything, she wasn't this devastated. So she worried for what could be the reason for such pain now that she has risen above her financial issues. But she kept quiet, waiting as her heart broke for the woman who could easily have been her daughter. Eventually, Mamada was able to gather her emotions, and she shared her pain and the accusations made by her children. Mama Jo listened intently, shocked at the turn of events. Mamada's thoughts drifted back to another difficult time in her life, the period after the death of her loving husband. It was a period of profound grief and overwhelming challenges as she struggled to cope with the loss of her husband and the responsibility of raising three young children on her own. Her husband had passed away suddenly, just after she had given birth to their third child. The loss of her husband, who had been her provider and protector, left a void in her life that seemed impossible to fill. She was left to care for a newborn and two younger children while struggling with her own grief and the uncertainty of their future. After the burial of her husband in their village, my mother returned to the city, determined to find a way to cope with the challenges ahead and provide for her children. However, she was met with another heartbreaking surprise upon her return. Her house had been ransacked and every document related to their properties and her husband's business has been taken. Everything she and her husband had worked so hard for had been stolen from under her nose. The betrayal by her husband's relative added to her grief and despair, leaving her feeling vulnerable and alone. Her only saving grace was that she had taken her personal bank information with her when she traveled to the village for her husband's burial. And also, before she left, she had transferred a substantial amount of money from her husband's account to help with the burial expenses. But she had not touched the money in addition to the funds realized from sympathizers. If she hadn't taken these precautions, she would have been left empty-handed. Devastated and overwhelmed, my mother sat down on the floor of the now empty sitting room, the weight of her loss and the betrayal of her husband's relative washing over her like waves. She wept bitterly, her sorrow echoing in the empty house. Her little children crying too, not understanding why mommy was crying. After the initial shock and confusion, my mother had brought the matter before her family, seeking their advice and support in her quest to reclaim the properties and assets stolen from her. Her elder brother, a wise and respected man in the clan, suggested that she go to court and secure the properties. However, my mother explained that she had no legal documents to prove her marriage to her late husband, as they had only been married traditionally. When asked about her husband's lawyer, my mother replied that the lawyer was not responding to her calls, and she did not have the money to hire a new lawyer to pursue the court process. The situation seemed hopeless, and my mother felt overwhelmed by the legal complexities and the lack of support from her late husband's family. Eventually, the lawyer who had been sick reached out to her, and the will was read out. But her husband had put his brother in charge of his properties and businesses, stating that he was supposed to hold it in trust for his children. The house where they are staying was the only property in her son's name, and so the brother had no say over it. Her husband left nothing to her name. The discovery of that was more heartbreaking because she remained idle at his insistence, and now he didn't think she was worthy of handling any business or property. How was she expected to care for the children until they were grown to take over their father's business? Even though the condition had been that the said brother should take good care of all their financial needs. But she knows already that that was a tall order. Who is going to enforce it? The few times she had made attempts to reach out to him for help had ended up with insults and pennies sent after as the financial support. She doesn't have the energy or money for the back and forth it will require because of the corrupt justice system in the country. So she had decided to let them be, faced her life and children. She started by trying to sell those new materials she owned, which her husband was always buying for her. Because if she paid for a shop and bought new goods, she and her children were going to starve. So to save them from that, she had to change her kids' school to a cheaper one she could afford with what was in her possession. None of them had called to ask how she or the children were coping, but she doesn't even want anything to do with them anymore, so it is better they stayed far from her. After paying the school fees and other necessary expenses for the house, the money in her account was no longer enough to start a full business in a shop as she knew it could happen. So she started going to her friends and neighbors to see if they could be interested in the wares she had at hand. Some pitied her and bought, but some mocked her as if they had been waiting for an opportunity to do so. But she continued no matter how difficult it got sometimes. But when she remembered the bills waiting to be paid and her children's future, she had let go and forged ahead. With the money left in her account after paying for school fees and other necessary expenses, my mother knew it could not be enough to start a full business in a shop. Undeterred, she had begun to reach out to her friends and neighbors, showcasing her wares and asking if they could be interested in purchasing from her. Forged ahead with tirelessly to grow her business from house to house. From house to house sales to renting a kiosk with few new goods. And later she upgraded to the market where she met the kind Mama Joe. After many years, her hard work and perseverance began to pay off as her business started to grow. Her customer base developed so well that she became the go-to person in the market for quality and affordable material. One day, tragedy struck my mother's life once again when a devastating fire engulfed her shop and several others in the market. Just days before that, my mother had invested every spare penny she had in her account to purchase goods for her business. On the morning of the fire, my mother was busy preparing her youngest child for school when her phone began to ring non-stop. She decided to answer the calls after attending to her child's needs, assuming that the calls were from customers. However, when she finally answered the phone, my mother's heart thudded in her chest as she heard the shocking news from someone in the market. Mamada, fire has burnt your shop to the ground. You better come and check for yourself. Overwhelmed by the devastating news, Mamada's legs had given way beneath her, and she fell to the ground. As Mamada lay on the floor, dazed and overwhelmed by the tragedy, her children, sensing their mother's distress, rushed to her side, crying out in confusion and fear. The sight of her children's worried faces had given Mamada strength to rise from the floor, her head throbbing, but she must go to the market to see for herself. Forgetting to bath or change from her sleeping wear, my mother took the children to school, not noticing the glances and side talks. One of the teachers in the school tried asking her what the matter was, but she was too distracted to hold a meaningful conversation. Upon arriving at the market and seeing that everything she had worked so hard for was gone, my mother felt a crushing despair wash over her. She sat down on the bare floor, overwhelmed by sorrow and the seemingly unsurmountable challenges she faced as a helpless young widow with young fatherless children. She wailed loudly, mourning her losses and the bleak future that lay ahead. In her distraught state, my mother felt someone lift her from the floor, but she was too lost in her grief to fear. She didn't even look to see who it was. At that moment, she felt so broken and defeated that she didn't think she would even care if someone wanted to harm her. As my mother was lost in her thought of despair and contemplating the relief that death might bring, she suddenly heard the distressed cries of her youngest child. The sound of her baby crying jolted my mother out of her dazed state. She pushed away from the person holding her, her heart pounding with fear and desperation as she frantically searched for her child, believing that her baby was close by. The onlookers, seeing Mamada's frantic and seemingly irrational behavior, became concerned for her safety and tried to restrain her to prevent her from hurting herself. They thought she had finally lost her mind, and their efforts to calm her and explain the situation only added to her distress. After struggling with the people holding her and trying to explain what she had heard, my mother realized that she was sounding irrational and crazy. So, with the help of some compassionate individuals, she was given cold water to drink and a yogurt to soothe her. As she calmed down, the people around her finally released her, and my mother, feeling embarrassed and overwhelmed, thanked everyone and left the market with a heavy heart. Despite the humiliation and the deep despair she felt, my mother knew she had to find the strength to carry on for the sake of her children. As she boarded the bus home, she couldn't shake off the confusion and shock of hearing her daughter's voice when she was obviously safe at school. One of her neighbors in the market had taken her phone to confirm her daughter's well-being, and the evidence was clear. Her daughter was safe and at school. Mamada had to accept that she had momentarily lost touch with reality due to the trauma of the shop fire. But she was certain of what she had heard when she imagined herself dead. Suddenly, she screamed in her head, "Wait!" But before she could fully grasp her thought, the bus screeched to a halt. Everyone turned to look at her as she remained seated. "Madam, go down from the bus conductor shouted at her. Confused, Mamada responded, "Why are you asking me to go down? Are you not the one that shouted for us to wait now?" "Me? No, it is me, the conductor and the driver," chorused mockingly. "I am sorry, please. I must have spoken out loud without knowing. Please continue, this is not my bus stop," Mamada pleaded. Driver hissed and continued driving, while the conductor continued to rain abuses on her. Mamada stopped listening the moment the bus moved. She kept pondering on the matter at hand, and she could only conclude that somehow her child's voice had been a wake-up call to her. She needed to stop any further thought towards death, at least for her children's sake. With this newfound realization, Mamada made up her mind to start afresh, no matter the difficulty. She knew that she needed to be strong and resilient for her children, and she was determined to build her life and provide a better future for them. How she will surmount the current hurdles, she doesn't know. But for now, just for today, she will go home, cook a very delicious pot of soup, and eat with her children. Tomorrow, she will know how to forge ahead. When she arrived home that day, an idea began to form in her mind, and she took stock of everything in her kitchen and the entire house. Determined to prioritize her children's immediate needs, she made the tough decision to sell some of their household appliances that she deemed non-essential for their survival. The microwave, one of the freezers, television, and some other luxury items were on the to sell list. She began to make calls immediately because she doesn't want to develop cold feet if she left it for later. After selling the last of those items, including her bed frame, Mamada realized that the money couldn't be enough to buy back the goods she lost in the fire. However, it would sustain them for a while if she managed it wisely. She also decided to restart her business with thrift wares, an area she was a little familiar with. With this plan in place, Mamada felt a renewed sense of peace. She made her pot of soup and rested before going to pick up her children from school, thinking of a good explanation for the missing household appliances. Mamada knew that her children were well behaved and understanding, and she was confident that they would adjust to the changes and support her in their new beginning. So that was how she had kept managing, selling whatever was good and still able to provide for her children. She has sold fruits, vegetables, beverages, name it, in addition to the thrift wares, just to patch up, especially when her children got admission into higher institutions. It was with pride and joy she has stood under sun and rain to give them whatever assistance they needed, as long as they remained focused on their studies and their future. And they had never disappointed her, not even once. Has she been called to their school for any bad report concerning her children? So how come it is now that only her last baby was in the university are the others waking up to call her a witch who didn't want them to succeed? How else does a mother encourage success in her children? Is there anything else she was supposed to do that she didn't do? She always prayed for them, burning the midnight candle in prayers, no matter how tired she was. She gave all she had, even though it was not the best, but it was what she could afford. She didn't contribute anything to her father's burial because she didn't want her son, who had gained admission at the time, to miss the opportunity because of funds, and her family had understood and supported her decision. So please, can someone explain to her how she was a witch? Or is there another definition to the word she wasn't aware of? She asked Mama Jo desperately. She felt confused, hurt, and betrayed by her children's accusations, struggling to understand how they could believe such things about her after all they had been through together. Mama Jo sat back after hearing the heartbreaking story and began to think of a way to help the distraught woman, because nothing beats losing one's own children, even though they are still alive. She has to help her. She has suffered too much. To add her children to the mix, Mama just suddenly stood, told Mama Ada to close her shop, as she was going to do the same. I am going to take you somewhere so that we can find out what is really going on. Okay, ma, Mama Ada said, wiping her tears at the thought of a solution. She quickly did as she was instructed and stood outside her shop waiting for Mama Joe. Her last baby was the only one who stood by her, but she was scared that that one will also follow her siblings once she graduated, just like it happened to them. So she must do something before it came to that. But what else is she supposed to do? She had been praying and trying to talk to them, but none of them picks her calls. And when they do is to rain abuses and curses on her. She was even afraid to pick her phone to call them now. She learned about her daughter's acceptance into a prestigious school outside the country for her master's and PhD on a full scholarship from her husband's younger sister. This was the same woman who had been the pioneer in the dismantling of her husband's business and properties after his death, calling her and her children a bunch of hopeless, helpless beggars when she had asked for assistance during a challenging time. How did this woman know about her daughter's achievement when she, her own mother, did not? My mother felt desperate and overwhelmed, fearing that she could lose her children in broad daylight. Her blood pressure was already at a dangerous state, and her doctor had been warning her to stop stressing and overthinking. But how was she supposed to stop now? One of her children was still in school, and the older ones had refused to help her. She knew she had to find a way to mend her relationship with her children and stop the worrying and anxiety that were taking a toll on her health. She stood lost in thought. Mama Joe had to touch her to bring her back to the present and told her, "Don't worry, my child. I am sure that this will be sorted out in no time. Come, let's go." So Mama Ada followed her. Mama Joe took her to a woman who only told her, "I know what you are facing, but there is a time and season under the sun when he who withholds the possession of a child to oppress him shall answer to the powers that be. Woman, don't try to fight for yourself. Leave this battle and continue as you have been since your husband died. The Almighty is not blind, neither is he deaf. He will bring justice, and all will understand that to turn aside the justice to a man or to subvert a man in his cause, the Lord does not approve. Hold your peace. Your children shall return, and with your own eyes you shall behold the end of the wicked." But can you tell me, what did I do wrong? Why did they suddenly turn against me? Mama Ada asked, not satisfied with the rambling the woman just did. She came for swift justice, and not long talks and parables. The woman looked at her and laughed. They are knowledge which are not useful to us, even though we might think otherwise. Knowing what happened will not help you. What is important is that your children will be restored to you. That is true. But don't I need to know what happened so it can be prevented from happening again? She insisted. You will hear the full story when the time comes. Just be patient. Your children will be returned. Mama Ada left there not satisfied, but somehow she knew she must do as the woman said. She thanked Mama Joe profusely and made up her mind to do something extraordinary for her. 1 year later. 1 year had passed, a whole 12 months, and Mama Ada found herself in a vivid dream. A woman she didn't recognize approached her as she lay in the mud, extending a hand to help her stand. "Why are you giving up at the verge of your victory?" "I am tired. I have tried. Please let me rest now," Mama Ada said, making to lay down again. But there was a clap of thunder which seemed to go through her insides, giving her such strength like she is never had before. The woman instructed Mama Ada to go home and take a bath. Once home, she was to retrieve her children's baby pictures and the pictures of herself pregnant with each of them. My mother was to place these photographs in front of her and begin to make declarations, speaking only. She was to call each of her children by their given names and recount her journey with them from the moment they were in her womb until they became adults. The woman instructed my mother to remind her children that they were her gift from the Lord and that she had labored and birthed them in pain. And because God gave them to you as a gift, the woman said, his gifts makes rich and adds no sorrow. Therefore, call each of their given names and declare that they shall not be a source of sorrow, but shall be like fruitful bowls. My mother was to continue making these declarations until she saw the result she was expecting. The woman's words resonated deeply with my mother, filling her with hope and determination. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and strength as she ran to do as instructed. She woke up to voices. As she ran to do as she was instructed, she woke up to voices. When the fog of sleep cleared, she heard the sound of her youngest daughter Alice crying in the sitting room. She immediately rushed to the source of the commotion, and upon entering the room, chaos ensued. The neighbors who had been holding Alice began to shout, and some even fled the scene. Alice stood up, looking at her mother as if she had seen a ghost. She made to run towards her daughter, but she saw Alice step back, frightened. Alice, please come to mommy. What is the matter? Why are you crying like that? My mother queried, fear seizing her heart as she feared the worst. Why are the neighbors gathered here? Please don't tell me you had joined your siblings too. My mother began to cry. You are the only reason why I am still sane and alive. Oh. Alice, please don't abandon me like they did. I won't be able to live if you do. She fell on her knees as she began to cry uncontrollably. She felt hands around her shoulders, and smelling the sweet scent of her child, she held onto her heart breaking at the burden that lay on her shoulders. Alice held strongly to her mom, not believing what she was witnessing. They had been waiting for an ambulance to take her mother's body to the mortuary when her mom, who was supposed to be dead, walked into the parlor, shocking everyone. Hearing her mother cry out in pain at her supposed rejection had broken her heart more than anything. So she held tightly to her breathing mother, whose body was as warm and soft as it had always been. Alice couldn't understand the miracle of the moment. All she knew was that her mother, who was once dead, now lives. She was aware of the hypertensions and other health issues that her mom was going through, but she had thought it was under control. Since she graduated and gotten a good job, she had stopped her mom from going to the market daily. But despite her efforts to care for her mother and ensure her well-being by hiring a sales manager for the shop, registering her in her company's hospital, and employing 2 household staff, Alice still blamed herself for not paying more attention to her mother. So that morning, when she had gone to check on her mother to tell her goodbye as she was leaving for work, she had found her cold and stiff. Their doctor neighbor, who was alerted by her screams, had confirmed that her mother was dead for at least 4 hours. After the emotional turmoil had settled, my mother thanked all who had come to console her daughter and assured them that she was okay. However, the medical doctor insisted on running some tests, to which my mother agreed. To everyone's surprise, the results came back clean. When the medical team heard her story, they were astounded, unable to explain the miraculous recovery. My mother knew that it was only by mercy that she had been brought back, but she kept this revelation to herself. When they returned home and were finally alone, my mother made her daughter promise not to tell anyone in the family what had happened. Alice agreed to keep the secret, with Alice now sleeping beside her on the bed after a long back and forth between them. Alice, afraid that she might wake up to find her mother gone again, eventually succumbed to sleep herself. Finally alone, my mother followed the instructions she had received in the dream. For 2 weeks, she faithfully carried out these instructions, making declarations over her children's life. On the morning of the 15th day, Mamada was awakened by Alice's voice, shouting at someone in the sitting room. She quickly tied a wrapper around her chest and hurried out to find out what the problem was. As she opened the door leading to the sitting room, she froze. Standing right there was her first son. When he noticed her presence, he made to rush towards her direction. But Alice blocked his path, saying, "You still haven't told me what you are doing here. You had better go back to wherever you are coming from." She continued to shout at him, not caring about their height or age difference. My mother felt her heart break over the scene before her. Those two used to be so inseparable. When Justin started misbehaving, Alice had fallen so sick from missing her brother. Now she doesn't even want to set eyes on him anymore. She gently walked to the entrance door where they were standing and shut it first. Her family had given enough gossip to the neighbors. She went to Alice and hugged her, holding on until she felt her daughter relax into the embrace. And a little while later, she felt her shaking from the great sobs she couldn't keep in anymore. My mother gently guided her baby to the city, motioning silently to Justin to sit as well. When Alice had calmed down, she laid there in her mother's warm embrace, without any intention of moving an inch. If her brother wanted to touch, he has a long wait to do, she thought to herself. My mother cleared her throat, looking at her son who looked so emaciated. Her once robust and cheerful child has become something else. So she looked at him, waiting for when he was ready to talk. Justin knelt down, tears running down his cheeks. "Mom, please, can you forgive me?" he pleaded, choking on the emotions welling up inside. "I don't know what happened. I just woke up that morning with an unexplained hatred towards you. The only thing in my memory of you was the dream I had that night. You were looking haggard and trying to eat us alive. I woke up from that dream with so much fear and hatred of you. I called Jenny, and she was having the same thing about you. That is all I can remember. Each time we spoke with you, the hatred seemed to increase." He was weeping uncontrollably now. My mother wanted to hug him so bad, but she has to be careful here, as she wouldn't want to hurt Alice's feeling, so she looked at her daughter. But Alice was also crying, looking at her brother. If not for the seriousness of the situation, her mother would have laughed. Her daughter acts tough, but her heart is so tender. That is why she wanted to tread carefully. But she was glad. Alice was feeling sorry for her brother too. So she gently stood up, giving Alice room to sit properly. My mother went to her trembling son and hugged him, her heart beating in pain at the wasted years. 5 years of pain and denial on both sides. Who or what would have caused such harm to innocent children? Who did she offend that would want to punish her through her children? These questions and many more like it kept running through her mind as she tried to absorb the pain she could feel her son holding in. They had hurt her very badly. It would not have been intentional, according to what he just said, and the revelation on the morning of her awakening. So she can't imagine the guilt that must be running through him now for doing something he had no control over. Her mind immediately latched onto her daughter Jenny. She sat back on the ground and raised Justin's head. "What of your sister? Where is she? What happened to her?" Justin looked at his mother and said hoarsely, "I haven't spoken to her in such a long time. We lost contact a few months ago." "Why? What happened?" my mother exclaimed, fear clutching at her heart. "I don't know, Mom. I'm so sorry," he said, his face botched up and swollen from crying. "You have nothing to be sorry for, my son," she said, hugging him again, doing her best to calm her nerves. "What has happened wasn't your fault in any way," she continued. He pushed away from her embrace. "What are you talking about, Mom?" he exclaimed. "Have you forgotten all the insults and all the abuses, the pain that I caused you?" She smiled, placing her palm on his hollow cheek. Justin was a spitting image of his father, and seeing him again after these many years caused something to lodge deep into her heart, inside her heart. But she was glad her son had been brought home to her safe and sound. "You are not guilty, son," she said, everything inside of her, a tear dropping at the weight of what she was feeling in that moment. She never knew it was possible to love her children any more than she already did. But in that moment, she is knowing a different dimension of that love than she had ever thought possible. "You are my son, and you are not guilty. Whatever happened has been forgiven and forgotten. Let it go. Son, let it go." Alice came to them then, taking the hand of her big brother and smiling up at him with tears in her eyes. "Yes, Justin, you are forgiven. Please forgive yourself too. I and Mommy have missed you so much. So please be at peace so we can be happy again." Feeling so proud of her baby, Mama Ada gathered them in her arms, and they remained, each of them feeling warmth and love in their mother's embrace, and their mom receiving healing and peace. They were jolted to reality with the sound of the doorbell. Mama Ada got up and rushed to the door, her heart skipping, and truly standing there was Jenny, who was fondly called Ada. Worry and something that looks like shame spread across her face. Mama Ada grabbed her daughter, hugging her ever so tightly, this time sobbing out loud, her heart filled with wonder and awe. God is truly alive, and He answers prayers too. She disengaged from the hug, laughing and crying at the same time, while running her hand through her daughter's face. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she chorused, over and over again. "Mom, please forgive me," Ada said, making to kneel down, but her mom helped her up. "Not that again, please. Come in, my dear, come in," Mama Ada said excitedly. But Alice and Justin were already at the door, and they took turns hugging their sister. Ada later told them how she woke up in her London home and wondered how she got there some months back. It took a while for her memory to be fully restored, and yesterday she remembered fully what she had done to her mother, so she had taken the first available flight back without rest until she got home. After the reconciliations and tears, Mama Ada knelt her 3 offsprings down and began to make declarations over them and their children and their children's children, blessing them as only a mother can. The joyful ambience in her home now was nothing she could imagine. For the first week after their return, they had insisted on sleeping on her bed. So she made an order for a bigger bed and mattress after the first 2 days. She was too old to squeeze her bones like that. Justin had paid her back the money she used in purchasing the bed. When she refused the cash he had given her, he had gone ahead to make a bank transfer to her account. "I still have your account number, Mom," he smiled triumphantly. She sleeps and wakes up in such bliss now, and it feels as though the last 5 years never happened. She had taken her children to go see Mama Jo, and the old woman was beside herself with joy. One would think it was her own children that were restored. But they are, in a way, Mama Ada thought to herself, smiling at the gift of another mother God had gifted her. Justin, having been told of the role the woman had played, had insisted that she retire from business in the market. He placed her on allowance, he and Ada covering all her expenses, from housekeeping to medicals, the help extending to her grandchildren as well. Justin had filed for the repossession of his father's company, which was on the verge of total ruin, but he took it back so he can rebuild his father's legacy. And in a few years, he was able to turn things around, leaving it in the care of Alice, while he went back to his real passion, which was tech. Their mom had insisted on keeping her business open, but she no longer does the day-to-day running of it. Their father's brother and younger sister had died, eaten alive by maggots, which no one could explain, but before they died, they confessed to having used diabolical powers to turn the children against their mother, when they got to the age of taking over the company. So Mama Ada and her children are doing excellently well. She's scheming with Mama Drew on how to match Justin up with a good girl. Basically, she lives to trouble her children now until they give her grandbabies. And when that is accomplished, she will look for another thing to trouble them with. After all, what other joy is there? Those children will give an arm for their mom now. Ada has been begging for her to come over to London, but Mama Ada has agreed only for a brief visit. Alice loved that idea because how is her mom supposed to travel thousands of miles away leaving her behind? It has become a thing of who mommy visits most now, and Mama Ada is basking in all the attention and love. The end. Hi people, hope we have learned one or two from this story. May what is ours never be corrupted or stolen from us. Have you watched the previous videos? If you haven't, do that. I promise you it was going to be an enjoyable ride. Please subscribe if you haven't done so. Like, comment, share. God bless you all. Bye.